Here in the refuge of this Sabbath home, we turn our busy mind toward silence and our full hearts toward one another. We move together through the mysteries, the bright surprise of birth and the shadowed questions of death. In our slow walk between the two, we will be wounded and we will be showered with grace, amazing, unending. Even in our sorrows, we feel our lives cradled in holiness we cannot comprehend. And though we each walk within a vast loneliness, the promise we offer here is that we do not walk alone. This is a holy place in which we gather, the light of the earth brought in and held, touched then by our answering light. The flame on a chalice, the flicker of a candle, the lamps of our open faces brought near. In this place of silence and celebration, solemnity and music, we make a sanctuary and name our home. While the prelude plays, I invite you, if you wish, to rise and light a candle of community in prayer or remembrance or thanksgiving, if you wish. I invite you to rise in body or spirit for the chalice lighting and remain standing for the spoken affirmation, the words of which are in your morning program. Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in every life. And our spoken affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. Thank you. Please be seated. Did I believe I had a clear mind? It was like the water of a river flowing shallow over the ice. And now that the rising water has broken the ice, I see what I thought was light is part of the dark. And now our song.
eyes not far from the city, and all the lilies don't really know how I got here. How I got these seeds, I got the tools, I could make things grow. The richest soil is down below. Night turns to day, this day could be whatever I want. It's time enough to say, oh, this is gonna be a good life. This has gotta be a good life. This could really be a good life, good life. Say, oh, got this feeling and it's so bright. My passion is on fire tonight. Could really be a good life, a good, good life. I see the pain and it's obscene. Thought when I slept was when I dreamed. Gotta stay awake so I can be the change in the world I want to see. Sometimes this stuff I can't work out. Sometimes the future is full of doubt. We've all got our stories, but please tell me what there is to complain about. When your heart begins to grow, let it take you over. Help to make things right. I gotta make things right. This is gonna be a good life. This has gotta be a good life. This could really be a good life, good life. Say, oh, got this feeling and it's so bright. My passion is on fire tonight. Could really be a good life, good, good life. Good life, good life. The hope is we will see a need that's greater than our own. The hope is we will help a sister out so we both can grow. The hope is me and you will be waking up right now. Cause hopefully we see there's so much to feel good about. Oh, this is gonna be a good life. This has gotta be a good life. This could really be a good life, good life. Say, oh, got this feeling and it's so bright. My passion is on fire tonight. Could really be a good life, good, good life. I woke up and opened up my eyes, not far from the city, and all the lilies don't really know how I got here. How I got these seeds, I got the tools, I could make things grow. The richest soil is down below. Night turns to day, this day could be whatever I want. This time enough to say. This time enough to
Our reading this morning is from that great theologian, Steven Pinker. He's a cognitive neuroscientist, not a but he does talk about some really, really interesting things. And this is from an article in the New York Times Magazine back in 2008 called The Moral Instinct. To appreciate that there is a distinctive part of our psychology for morality, look at how moral judgments differ from other kinds of opinions we have. Moralization is a psychological state that turns on and off like a switch. And when it's on, a distinctive mindset commandeers our thinking. It makes us deem actions immoral, killing is wrong, rather than just disagreeable. I hate Brussels sprouts, unfashionable or prudent. Moralization invokes rules that are felt to be universal. Prohibitions of rape and murder, for example, are not felt to be matters of local custom, but to be universally and objectively warranted. One can easily say, I don't like Brussels sprouts, but I don't care if you eat them. But no one would say, I don't like killing, but it's okay if you murder someone. People also feel that those who commit immoral acts deserve to be punished. Not only is it allowable to inflict pain on a person who has broken a moral rule, it's wrong not to. We all know what it feels like when that moralization switch flips inside of us. The righteous glow, the drive to recruit others to the cause. The psychologist Paul Rosen compared people who engage in the same behavior but with different switch settings. Health vegetarians avoid meat for practical reasons, like lowering cholesterol. Moral vegetarians avoid it for ethical reasons, to avoid complicity in the suffering of animals. The moral motive sets off a cascade of opinions. Moral vegetarians are more likely to treat meat as a contaminant, like refusing to eat a bowl of soup into which a single drop of beef broth has fallen. They're more likely to think that other people ought to be vegetarian and are more likely to imbue their dietary habit with other virtues, like believing that avoiding meat makes people less aggressive. The culture wars largely consist of the moralization or amoralization of particular behaviors. Even when people agree that an outcome is desirable, they may disagree on whether it should be treated as a matter of preference and prudence or as a matter of sin and virtue. Rosen notes, for example, that smoking has been moralized. Until recently, it was understood that some people didn't enjoy smoking or avoided it because it was unhealthy. Now, smoking is treated as immoral. Smokers are ostracized, images of people smoking are censored, and entities touched by smoke, or a hotel room, for example, are felt to be contaminated. At the same time, other behaviors have been amoralized, switched from moral failings to lifestyle choices. Divorce, illegitimacy, marijuana use, homosexuality. Many afflictions have been reassigned from payback for bad choices to unlucky misfortunes. There seems to be a law of conservation of moralization, so that as old behaviors are taken out of the moralized column, new ones are added. Things that past generations treated as practical matters are now ethical battlegrounds, including disposable diapers, IQ tests, poultry farms, Barbie dolls, and energy use. Many of these moralizations, like the assault on smoking, may be understood as practical tactics to reduce some recently identified harm. But whether an activity flips our mental switches to the moral setting isn't just a matter of how much harm it does. We don't show contempt to the man who fails to change the batteries in his smoke alarms or takes his family on a driving vacation, both of which multiply the risk they will die in an accident. The reason for the double standard is obvious. People tend to align their moralization with their own lifestyles. Thus ends the reading. We have a time now for a moment of prayer or meditation. If you would like to please just get comfortable, we'll have our blessing, then quiet sitting, and then a musical response. Our prayer this morning, and it is that, is from Jan Richardson. It's called Blessing in the Chaos. To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stilling of the voices that have laid their claim on you, that have made their home in you, that go with you even to the holy places, but will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with wholeness or feel the grace that fashioned you. Let what distracts you cease. Let what divides you cease. Let there come an end to what diminishes and demeans, and let depart all that keeps you in its cage. Let there be an opening into the quiet that lies beneath the chaos, where you find the peace you did not think possible, and see what shimmers within the storm. Let us have a moment of silence.
To pray, you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you. And know that there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments steadily growing. And in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle, that Sunday morning, over Salt River, circled in blue sky, in wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we were born and die soon within a true circle of motion. Like eagle rounding out the morning inside us, we pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty.
So when I was a kid, one time I heard a friend's mom tell her, you know, if you tell a lie, you'll make Jesus cry. Wait a minute, that's a lie. My second thought was, there has to be a better reason to do the right thing than don't make Jesus cry. So now later on, I had a child of my own, and I started to understand exactly how a mother might get exhausted and fed up enough to start putting words in Jesus's mouth. Teaching kids how to make moral decisions is tough. I don't know about your kids, but mine responded to everything with why or why not. We don't hit people. Why not? You shouldn't lie. Why, mommy? And then it gets complicated. The first time your child has to balance telling the truth with not hurting someone else's feelings, or her friends get in a fight and try to make her pick sides. And that's when you realize there's a lot more behind the moral and ethical decisions that you make every day than you had ever really thought about. Most religions have a set of answers to these questions. And in fact, C.S. Lewis built his argument for Christianity beginning from the universality of rules like murder is wrong and don't sleep with your neighbor's wife. For such rules to be so widespread, the thinking went, they must have come from a source greater than mere humans. In the last 50 years or so, though, researchers have found increasing evidence that this deeply felt moral sense has a physical, neurological origin that has been shaped by evolution. And it seems pretty basic that if humans hadn't developed some rules for living together, we wouldn't have been able to build social structures, live in cities, highways, polluting the earth, all the questionable achievements we've had. Whether you believe that morality was handed down by God or evolved as humans began to live in larger and larger groups, you may not have given much thought to the ways our moral codes can evoke some pretty irrational responses. Are your moral choices based on reason? Let's try a little thought experiment designed by psychologist Jonathan. A family's dog, sadly, is killed by a car in front of their house. They heard that dog meat is delicious, so they cut up the dog's body and cook and eat it for breakfast. What do you think? Is that okay? Most people immediately say, no, no, you can't do that. But then they grope for a reason. Haidt argues that people don't engage in moral reasoning, but moral rationalization. Let's try another thought exercise. You may have encountered this one before. It's called the trolley problem. On your morning walk, you see a trolley car hurtling down the track. The conductor slumped over the controls. In the path of the trolley are 5 men working on the track, oblivious to the danger. You are standing at a fork in the track and can pull a lever that will divert the trolley onto a spur, saving the 5 men. Unfortunately, the trolley would then run over a single worker who is laboring on the spur. Is it permissible to throw the switch, killing 1 man to save 5? Most people will say yes to that. But consider a different scene. Now you're on a bridge overlooking the tracks, and you've spotted the runaway trolley bearing down on the 5 workers. Now the only way to stop the trolley, forgive me, this is the thought experiment, is to throw a heavy object in its path. The only heavy object within reach is a fat man. Do you throw the man off the bridge? This thought experiment does not allow you to come up with more creative solutions. It does not engage in speculation about whether a very large human being is enough to stop a runaway trolley. The question is, if that's your choice, could you put hands on a human being and throw them off the bridge to save 5 of them? From a purely rational standpoint, the dilemma's the same. By the utilitarian standard of what results in the greatest good for the greatest number, the two dilemmas are morally equivalent. But most people don't feel the same about both problems. Though they would pull the switch in the first dilemma, they would not heave the fat man in the second. When pressed for a reason, they can't come up with anything coherent, although moral philosophers haven't really come up with anything either. And more than 200,000 people from 100 different countries who responded to this thought experiment for the researchers. People of different sexes, ages, cultures, religions, and educational background were all more willing to throw a switch than to push a man off a bridge. Psychologists thought maybe this is because the thought of physically laying hands on a fellow human being overwhelmed the utilitarian calculus of saving other lives. Just as we don't think it's okay to euthanize one person to save five others with organ transplant. So, some Princeton scientists said, hey, we've got a functional MRI that we're not using. Let's test it out in there. When people considered a hands off dilemma, like flipping a switch, only the areas involved in rational calculation lit up. But when they considered an action that required killing someone with their bare hands, emotional areas in the brain lit up as well. Their findings support the theory that our moral intuitions come from a triumph of emotional impulse over a cost benefit analysis. Which leaves us asking, is there an innate neurological basis for a moral instinct? If so, is it physiological, heritable, and therefore the result of and subject to evolutionary forces? There is some evidence, not for a morality gene per se, but for a genetic component of certain traits. So, Steven Pinker, the fellow we heard from earlier, says the character traits called conscientiousness and agreeableness are far more correlated in identical twins separated at birth who share their genes but not their environment than in adoptive siblings raised together who share their environment but not their genes. People given diagnoses of antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy show signs of moral blindness from the time they're children. They bully younger children, torture animals, habitually lie, and seem incapable of empathy or remorse, often despite normal family backgrounds. Though psychopathy probably comes from a genetic predisposition, a milder version can be caused by damage to the frontal regions of the brain, including the areas that inhibit most of us from throwing the hypothetical fat man off the bridge. The neuroscientists Hannah and Antonio Damasio and their colleagues found that some children who sustain severe injuries to their frontal lobes can grow up into callous and irresponsible adults despite normal intelligence. They lie, steal, ignore punishment, endanger their own children, and can't think through even the simplest dilemmas like what two people should do if they disagree on which TV program to watch. 150 years ago, Darwin wondered whether warring between neighboring groups might have caused humans to evolve to be more helpful to each other, because more cohesive groups would be better able to triumph over their neighbors. A couple of years ago, Nature published a paper demonstrating something known as parochial altruism, the idea that people prefer to help strangers from their own ethnic group over strangers from another group. I think we've seen far too much evidence of this in recent years. During the Pleistocene epoch, when agriculture was emerging, the human population hardly grew over 10,000 years. One researcher, no, not 10,000, 100,000 years, pardon me. One researcher who looked at archaeological records believes it was because people were killing each other off in wars. Sam Bowles showed that cooperative, altruistic humans could indeed have outsurvived less cooperative folks, but only if the cooperative groups also had practices, such as monogamy and food sharing, that equalize the ability of people within the group to reproduce. In order for such groups to thrive, they would have had to drive off individuals who were disruptive, who didn't follow these norms. So that's one possible explanation for the emergence of conformity and cultural pressure to enforce it. It makes sense. That moralization switch that makes us want to force other people to follow our moral codes may be a result of these evolutionary pressures. That doesn't really get us to why different cultures have different moral codes. And clearly we do. Another example from Steven Pinker. Consider this moral dilemma. A runaway trolley is about to kill a school teacher. You can divert the trolley onto a sidetrack, but the trolley would trip a switch, sending a signal to a class of 6-year-olds, giving them permission to name a teddy bear Mohammed. Is it permissible to pull the lever? It's not a joke. In 2008, a British woman teaching in a private school in Sudan allowed her class to name a teddy bear after the most popular boy in the class, who bore the name of the founder of Islam. She was jailed for blasphemy and threatened with a public flogging while a mob outside the prison demanded her death. To the protesters, the woman's life had less value than maximizing the dignity of their religion, and their judgment on whether it is right to divert the hypothetical trolley would have differed from ours. So if you examine moral codes from around the world, what do they have in common? Where do they differ? The exact number of themes depends on whether you're a lumper or a splitter, but many researchers count harm, fairness, which can encompass autonomy or freedom, community, authority, and purity. Differences in moral codes then result from the relative emphasis that each culture puts on these 5 values or moral domains. So, for example, Jewish laws of kashrut or kosher support the moral value of purity, which Gentiles perceive as unnecessary. The Roman Catholic Church and many Asian cultures place a high value on authority, whereas Unitarian Universalists tend to place a very low value on authority. It's these differences in emphasis that result in the chasm between conservative and liberal values. Occasionally joked that if members of this church were the kind of people who did what other people told them to do, they wouldn't be UUs, they'd be Catholics. It's also true that we have many UUs who were raised Catholic or Mormon or Baptist and got tired of being told what to think. So they fled to the UUA, where we'll argue you to death, but we won't tell you you're going to hell for disagreeing with. In general, liberals tend to emphasize preventing harm and enforcing fairness, while conservatives place a higher weight on group loyalty, authority, and purity. Conservatives often define their in-group more narrowly as well, by a particular demographic, for example, whereas we UUs tend to trip over ourselves to include every living being, the 4-leggeds and the 2-leggeds and those that swim and those that fly. I'm not making fun, I actually love them. Our modern institutions often question and try to change the way activities are assigned to moral spheres. Market economies put everything up for sale. Science seeks to understand phenomena without passing judgment on them. Secular philosophy is in the business of scrutinizing all beliefs, including those entrenched by authority and tradition. So we shouldn't be too surprised that some people see these organizations as morally corrosive. And looking at the 5 domains can help us understand why some people might think it's dangerous to even consider that there might be an evolutionary basis for morality. If we lessen the value of authority, won't it lead to spineless moral relativism and even nihilism? Well, I think we UUs can be courageous enough to honestly examine the sources of moral values, to look at our evolutionary without thinking that they're any less important for having arisen naturally. In my view, humanity's accomplishments and the existence of a moral compass are even more miraculous when we look at them that way. So, if you look at the UU7 principles and consider how they map to these 5 domains, and I know you don't have hymnals, but should you ever wish to look them up, they're at the beginning of the hymnal, just a couple of pages before the first hymn. Do y'all know your 7 principles? Okay. So, we, the member congregations of the UUA, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience, and the use of the democratic process within our congregations, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. So let's look at these 5 domains and think about how the 7 principles map onto them. So inherent worth and dignity. Our 5 domains, remember, are preventing harm, fairness, community, authority, purity. So inherent worth and dignity, what domains do you think? So I think preventing harm, definitely. Fairness. Anything else? I'd say community. Seeing everybody as a member of our much larger community. Number 2, justice, equity, and compassion. I think that's probably fairness, community, preventing harm, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to growth. What do you think? Community? Free and responsible search for truth and meaning. I struggled with this one. I finally decided this may be a uniquely Unitarian Universalist moral and ethical value. Or it could be a manifestation of fairness in the form of freedom. The democratic process. What do you think? Community and fairness. The goal of world community. Fairness, community. 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence. Community. Preventing harm. Do you notice anything missing? There's no purity in here. Anything, yeah, and authority. So I actually think that we're sort of, I don't think that UUs completely discard authority, especially if you've ever been involved in any governance activities or regional or national activities where there's a huge emphasis on process. You have to follow the process. I'll be honest, I'm just ornery enough. My response to that is usually no, I don't. But I think we do value authority. It's just that we don't vest authority in individuals. We vest authority in, frankly, committees, congregations, our elected officials at the UUA. So we vest authority in the democratic process, I think, but not so much in people. So remember that in Pinker's article, he pointed out that American culture is changing which behaviors trip that moralization switch. Homosexuality moves from a moral failing to a perfectly respectable choice, while sexual harassment on the job goes from rude but tolerated. Remember the show Mad Men? I think was some of us are old enough to remember what this was like. I worked in radio when I was in my 20s. I want some sexual harassment to behavior that's now worthy of criminal charges. The problem is we're not all moving together. So one person's immorality is another person's lifestyle choice. Numerous conservatives are now complaining about cancel culture and the woke left as being oppressive and authoritarian. Columnist Rod Dreher repeatedly denounces this movement as being the biggest danger to democracy in the United States. I don't agree with him, but that is a point of view we should be aware of. Their objections do suddenly make a little more sense if you realize that those taking to Twitter have had their moralization switch thrown. Remember, one of the hallmarks of a moral value is that you have a responsibility to punish those who violate it. The people being denounced are still operating in a world where their standards might be considered boorish, uncouth, tacky, which, by the way, is the biggest insult my mother can vest on someone. It's just tacky, but not immoral. The abortion issue has a little of this too, I think. What throws your moralization switch in relation to the abortion issue? Is it about autonomy of women, or is it about preventing harm to a potential life? Those who don't see a 6-week-old fetus as being actually human yet, as being potential, not person, have a hard time understanding the gut level reaction triggered in those who see a baby in a clot of 4 cells. But of course, it's more complicated than whether people are making a coolly rational argument and others are arguing from passionate morality. Many people engaged in this particular fight have had that switch thrown. It's just a different switch. So instead of preventing harm to fetuses, the people who were at the Women's March this weekend are arguing in favor of letting women make their own decisions, protecting women's autonomy, protecting fairness and freedom, and weighing the value of an existing life over the value of a potential one. I'm not here to say that one of these positions is moral and one isn't. That's far too complicated an issue, and really my own position is irrelevant here. But it is helpful, I think, to recognize when people are arguing from completely different positions or with different senses of whether something is an issue of morality or merely one of good manners. It's easier to uphold our first principle. Our first principle is hard. Respecting the inherent worth and dignity of every person, including Tucker Carlson, including all those people, including, I'm not going to start naming names. It's hard. When I can stop and take a deep breath and recognize that the people I disagree with are acting out of their own moral sense, that their own moralization switch might have been thrown, they're not, in their point of view, being selfish or cruel. I don't have to agree with the people who came up with Senate Bill 8, but it does help me not to have such rage if I can take a deep breath and understand why they. And it's also good to be able to recognize when my own moralization switch has been thrown in response to, say, somebody refusing to get a vaccine. If I'm reacting emotionally, maybe I can take a moment to recognize the source of that passion or that disgust and reevaluate. Is this reaction appropriate? So keeping those 5 domains of morality, preventing harm, fairness, or autonomy, community, authority, purity, in mind can help us make better moral decisions ourselves when we're confronted with a runaway trolley. When values conflict, which one is most important to you? Are you responding on a gut level based on childhood training that your adult mind has reconsidered? So, speaking of childhood training, I have to admit, I didn't know about any of these ideas when my daughter was small. Instead, I came up with a very simple question. If everyone did what you're thinking about doing, little girl, Would the world be better or worse? Turns out this is an actual strategy. It's called universalization, appropriate for universalists, right? Researchers have actually studied it, and they found out even 4-year-olds can apply this logic. I personally found it very useful for all those little transgressions that small children think no one will notice, and that we ourselves might sometimes think, oh, it's such a little thing. It's also really relevant in the world of a pandemic. Mask wearing, quarantining, getting vaccinated, saving energy, trying to reduce our carbon footprints. Many of the toughest moral choices we're faced with right now are difficult because they are abstract. The harms are either distant from us physically or far enough in the future that they don't seem real. So, bringing it down to if everyone in the world did that can make those choices a little more concrete. Trying to make consistent moral choices in 2021 America when there is so much to be angry about and so many people who are already ranting is a huge mountain to climb. Understanding those 5 domains, remembering that moral judgments invoke emotion before reason, recognizing that other people may be weighting those domains differently, and asking, what if everyone else did that too? Are the best tools I've found for trying to identify that straight and narrow. Amen. We can have an open dialogue if you would like to. We've got about 10 minutes left in the service. I don't know how long the confirming our faith portion lasts, but if anybody has any questions or wants to discuss, someone will bring you a microphone. Raise your hand.
Back 40 years ago, when I was studying psychology, kind of the be all and end all we were taught was Kohlberg's levels of moral reasoning. Is that still the science, or has it moved on from there?
It wasn't something I looked at. I'm aware of that. It wasn't something that that I really was looking at when I was researching this. Whether it's a thing in psychology or not, I can't answer. Anybody else? All right. This church, as you know, and like all Unitarian Universalist churches, is supported by the people in this community. Your services, your service to the community and to each other, your learning and growth is funded by your gifts. I invite you now to come and leave a gift in the offering bowl on the table at the back, or you can give, there is a code or a URL in your morning program you can give online if you like. The church mobile app home screen. Let us have our closing song, Draw the Circle Wide.
Side by side.
Choose to bless the world. The choice to bless the world is more than an act of will, a moving forward into the world with the intention to do good. It is an act of recognition, a confession of surprise, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable beauty, grace, and mystery abide. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. Please rise in body or spirit for our benediction in extinguishing the chalice. Deep peace of the running wave to you, deep peace of the flowing air to you, deep peace of the quiet earth to you, deep peace of the shining stars to you, deep peace of the infinite peace to you. Join me now to say the words for extinguishing our chalice, which are in your program. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please be seated again for the postlude. you.